You know, when it comes to gaming nowadays, there are some opinions you're just not allowed to have. You can't say bad things about modern God of War. Miyazaki is literally God. And when it comes to Resident Evil, despite being a heavily ridiculed franchise for the past 2 decades, they've managed to create their own can do no wrong by remaking a lot of their classic games. This is not to include the original remake that came out before the franchise went, kind of bad, but that still had the classic fixed camera gameplay, while the second, third, and obviously fourth game played traditional third-person shooters. But what I want to get into is not so much what game they decide to make next. Given the Dead Rising censorship, I'm kind of afraid to see it, but more so the odd way these remakes have been looked at by the public. The basic opinion is the second remake is amazing, the third one is something we don't talk about, and the fourth one is literally perfect, and if you don't agree, that's sacrilege. I don't want to sound like I've come on to tell everybody they're wrong, but I do think it's a bit odd that Resident Evil, a franchise that's done so many questionable things that its games disliked probably more than they should be, has somehow gotten into this position. Just to clarify, I don't dislike any of these games, that's not the point of this. But there are issues that have been overlooked or just blatantly denied. This may be a good time to like the video or consider subscribing if you're leaning in my direction, because what I say next will persuade you to do anything but. Okay, now that you've done that, just hear me out. The second remake is about the same level of quality as the third remake.
Fuck me.
If you want to know how I've come to this conclusion, let's look at why the third remake is so disliked. It's not complicated, they cut out a lot of things. Gravedigger boss, multiple areas, the game is way too short, and obviously people noticed. I have other issues too, I don't much care for the bosses in either of the two remakes, but that's not what most people bring up, it's down to what they cut out. Given it's a remake, I do understand not wanting that, especially because the third game is the weakest of the main trilogy, but this is the thing that really confuses me. The second remake basically did the same thing. And arguably, they did it worse.
He's absolutely bonkers!
Given the second game's perfect status, people tend to overlook this. It's been glossed over in many a review, but the whole separate scenario concept that the original game achieved using 2 discs has been thrown in the trash. This is not my first time discussing it, but it bears repeating. All the playthroughs, Claire A, Claire B, Leon A, Leon B, or first and second run as they call it, are almost the same. Aside from character-specific weapons, side characters they can meet, and the second-to-last boss, almost everything is the exact same. Yeah, only Leon can encounter the Gator, Mr. X is quite different in Run 2, but for the most part, the second run barely even warrants doing upon returning playthroughs. Keep in mind there's a total of 4 runs, but if you exclude the content that gets repeated, something Resi 6 got heavily criticized for, the total length would probably lose to the third remake. Crazy, isn't it? The reason for this is because the games were meant to be released together. In the end, they decided that would be less money, but that explains why both games were heavily cut down. However, while one game has been criticized to death, the other has gotten a free pass. I guess it's because you can technically play it longer, but I don't know why that matters if you're just doing the same stuff. This game was immune to doing anything wrong, and if you really want to, because I do, you could make the argument that this is the least good remake.
You've lost it completely.
Both games cut content, that's a fact. Second game put pasted content over it, but it still cut content. But the key difference is while the third game just made it shorter, the second one kinda fucked up the plot. The two scenarios do not connect in any way, shape, or form. They could not be doing this at the same time. Mr. X is literally killed by Birkin in Claire's game, and overall it's more like Resi 1, in which the character you don't use doesn't do a thing. You do have to play the second run to get the final ending and gimmick boss. I don't know why they make you do that. Trying to hide the fuck up, I guess. But not only do these scenarios not go together, they completely ruin the narrative. A narrative of an established game, possibly the most important one story-wise, that was not like this when it came out. No matter what you want to believe, the third game didn't have this issue. It's still not a good thing, but at least the narrative isn't fucked. It baffles me to no end how only one of these can be so heavily criticized, and yes, in a way, I may prefer the third game. A disappointment, definitely, but not really any more of one. The reason I say 2 may be the least good is because the first one, despite being old, is amazing. Nothing but improvements. Debatably the best Resi game aside from 4. And speaking of 4, that remake is real good. It's 99.99% improved in every way, but there is one thing, a not-so-good decision they made, and despite blatantly being a thing, I have been told the issue is simply not real. If you shoot an enemy in the head, the stun that you would always get in the original is random here. This is why I brought up games that can do no wrong, because this shouldn't have been changed, and most of the reviews that I've looked at don't even acknowledge it. Shout out to Avalanche Reviews for bringing this up. His overall opinion on Resi 4 compared to 5 and 6 is questionable, but unlike anybody else, the mechanic of messing with the headshots was described as something that wasn't broken and should have been left alone. Now, to be fair, there is an argument to be made. You could say it's a horror game and a random aspect is good, and while that could normally be true, the second and third game have random headshots, but Resident Evil 4 is not simply a horror game. It never was, and the remake still isn't. You can still drop-kick enemies into each other, it's just random now. And random is not a good thing unless you're supposed to be on the edge. That's why in horror games it works, but no matter what you want to call it, that's not what this is. This means you can no longer count on headshots. A handgun used to be enough to get out of a bad situation if you were good enough, but now if you rush in planning on a headshot, you could be fucked over. You might not get a stun, get grabbed, and take damage, which in this type of game should never be a thing. I'm trying my best not to be condescending, but I just don't understand why nobody will acknowledge the remake made one mistake. I hear it being defended, saying you're not good enough, it would be too easy, and if that was the case, why was the first game so damn popular? Granted, people threw it under the bus when this came out, saying it was never that good, but if this mechanic was a problem, why was the game so fucking popular? You know why? Because it wasn't a problem. In fact, if you question why a game with tank controls was so damn fun, especially because it completely changed the franchise, this is the reason. It's not the storyline, that was nothing special. The voice acting was still mediocre, wasn't really in line with what Resident Evil was at the time, but this skill-based mechanic was the best thing about it. It's why me and many others could not and would not put the game down. And to throw that away just to pretend the new game is utter perfection, with no flaws whatsoever, is just a sad thing. I know most people won't accept this undeniable truth, and the bizarre argument about the original game being too easy, this is a modern Resident Evil game. It's still easy. Taking away a reliable mechanic, that's artificial difficulty. There's just no basis to that argument. This is still more of an action game, and adding in cheap ways to take damage doesn't change it. I wasn't trying to say Resi 6 was a great game before, but if it had done something like this, had you taking damage over an unreliable mechanic, it would be another reason you must hate that game. Again, 6 has other problems, but similar to how they had you repeat sections, at least there is a reason, being the campaigns were somewhat connected, and it would have been kind of hard to get around that. With the remake, they just didn't bother to finish. It's still the far better game, but the way these are commonly criticized just doesn't make sense. I'm not trying to say any of these remakes are bad, because they're not, and neither is 3, but they're all flawed in ways they just shouldn't be. 2 and 3 were rushed to get them out faster. If not for that, they still wouldn't have been perfect. I don't love everything about them, but still there's just no excuse. As for Resi 4, that was on purpose, it wasn't a mistake. Let's be honest, it probably wouldn't matter. That was going to be a perfect game, just like Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok. All good games, debatably great games, but not completely flawless, it's that simple. That's really my only issue with how these games are viewed. I'm not saying we should hate them, aside from Last of Us Part 2, fuck that game. But to excuse every little flaw just so we can say 10 out of 10, while at the same time acting like the game that started it wasn't that great, that is something I won't hold with. And when it happens, I'm gonna call it out. It is what it is, some people don't like it, but I feel the reputation of these remakes just doesn't make any sense. They've gotten away with a lot of stupid bullshit, a lot of times screwing the fans over. And while games like Resi 7 and 8 are judged accordingly, maybe even a bit underrated, I honestly loved Village, but the remakes aside from 3 can apparently do no wrong. Why anybody wants to defend Capcom to death is beyond me, especially now, given their Dead Rising pro-communist censorship, but I guess to each their own. If I had to rank these remakes given that the first game is clearly the best, I still have to go with 4 because it is quite good, and for the audacity to fuck with the story for no good reason, Resi 2 is my least favorite remake. I know that's insane, but it is what it is. You play through the first run, and you've seen most of the game. I'll emphasize one last time, I do not dislike these games. They're still some of the better Resident Evil games, but the fact is, they could actually deserve their perfect ratings the fans give them. So if you can see any of these points, please do like the video. Subscribing would be a good option too, and above all, sharing the video would be highly appreciated, as YouTube clearly quit doing that. If my mildly negative opinion has made you hate gaming completely, then you can check out the main channel for the same thing, but with movies and TV series. I'm the Game Analyst, and don't forget, almost nothing is perfect, get over it. Oh, what? You're actually here? That's fucking amazing. I guess you may as well check out the main channel, in which I discuss movies, TV series, and the offensive topics that lie within. If you're into that, then press the link in the description. It's right there.